The world had shrunk to the size of a French field. Sergeant Curtis Garth wiped the grime from his goggles and peered through the slit of the Sherman's periscope. Beyond the hedgerow ahead, sunlight flickered through tangled roots and branches like light through a cage. He could hear it before he saw it, the crack of a Mauser, the whine of ricocheting steel, the grunt of the engine straining against the mud. "Driver, hold it!" he barked. The tank lurched to a stop. Inside the turret, the air was thick with cordite and sweat. The hedgerow, an earthen embankment 3 feet thick and 6 feet high, its top laced with centuries-old roots, loomed like a green wall. They'd been fighting these things for 3 weeks now. Every field was a fortress. Every turn of the track could be death. The radio hissed. "Red Dog 2 to all units. We're buttoned up tight. Can't move forward, can't see a damn thing. Mortar fire from the far side. Requesting guidance over. Static." Then the voice of Lieutenant Harper, calm but weary. "Negative on advance, Red Dog 2. Hold position. Air can't see targets through the hedges. We'll wait for the bulldozers to cut through." Bulldozers. Garth spat into an empty ammo box. "We'll be dead before they cut through anything." Outside, the Norman countryside looked peaceful from the air, lush green and divided into neat squares. From the ground, it was hell. Each of those squares was a trap, narrow lanes lined with hedges perfect for ambush. The Germans had been farming this land for centuries, now they were killing with it. Every approach was predictable, every breakthrough temporary. Tanks would surge forward through one field, only to find themselves boxed in by another hedge. By the time the engineers cleared it, the enemy had repositioned, and the process began again. Garth's tank sat in the mud engine, idling low. Corporal Evans, the gunner, lifted his head from the scope. "Nothing, Sarge. Just leaves and smoke." Garth rubbed his temples. "There's always something." A moment later, a flash of white smoke burst from the hedgerow. A Panzerfaust. Down. The explosion hit like a hammer. The Sherman rocked sideways, dirt cascading off the roof. The crew swore, ears ringing. Evans slammed the traverse, searching for the source. "Loader heat shell loaded. Send it." The 75mm cannon thundered the recoil, slamming through their chests. The shell tore into the hedgerow, shredding roots and dirt. For a moment, silence. Then the chatter of an MG-42 replied sharp, merciless. They were pinned again. When dusk came, the tanks withdrew to a narrow lane for repairs. The 2nd Armored Division had advanced only half a mile that day. Same as the day before. Same as the week before. Garth climbed out of his Sherman boots, sinking into the mud. He stretched his back, feeling every hour of exhaustion settle into his bones. Around him, the camp buzzed with quiet frustration, men cleaning guns, smoking cigarettes, arguing over maps that didn't matter anymore. The bocage, that was what the locals called it. The word had become a curse. Captain Daniels, his company commander, knelt over a field sketch illuminated by a lantern. "We can't keep ramming these hedges. Every time we push through one, we expose our belly. Jerry's just waiting with the Panzerfausts." Garth crossed his arms. "Then we stop ramming them." Daniels looked up. "You have a better idea." Sergeant Garth hesitated, then said, "Yeah, we go through them." Daniels frowned. "That's what I just said." "No, sir. Through them. Not over, not around. Through." Later that night, Garth wandered the motor pool flashlight, flicking across the battered tanks and bulldozers lined up for maintenance. Sparks crackled from a welder's torch nearby, throwing blue light across steel. He paused, watching. A mechanic named Hollis looked up, lifting his welding mask. "You break something again, Sarge." "Not yet," Garth muttered. "You still got that scrap pile from the busted German obstacles." Hollis nodded toward a heap of twisted metal fragments of steel, from destroyed beach defenses, rusted but solid. "What for?" Hollis asked. Garth stared at his Sherman. Its rounded front glistened under the moonlight, streaked with dirt and oil. "Tell me," he said slowly, "what happens if we bolt some of that junk to the front, sharp pieces like tusks?" Hollis frowned. "Tusks, yeah. Something that could dig into those hedges and tear them apart instead of climbing over them." Hollis chuckled. "You planning to make a tank or a rhinoceros?" Garth grinned. "Maybe both." They worked by moonlight. Sparks flew in the night air, the scent of molten metal mingling with diesel and wet earth. Garth cut the scrap into rough spikes, 4 long, jagged prongs welded together, like the tines of a pitchfork. The others gathered to watch. "You've lost your damn mind," Sarge Evans muttered, but he didn't stop watching. "Crazy gets results," Garth replied, squinting through his goggles as the welding arc flared again. "If the brass won't give us a way through, we'll make one." The crew called it Garth's Rhino. By dawn, the first prototype was ready, crude, uneven, ugly as sin. But when Garth climbed into his tank and revved the engine, the sound felt different. Alive. He gripped the radio handset. "Red Dog 2 to command, requesting permission for a little field test." The hedgerow ahead loomed like a green wall. Birds scattered as the Sherman roared forward, treads grinding deep into the mud. The Rhino hit the hedge head-on, and instead of climbing it, bit. Roots snapped, earth split. The tank lurched, then pushed through, exploding into the next field in a shower of dirt and leaves. The crew whooped inside the turret. Evans slapped the turret wall. "Son of a bitch, it worked." Garth grinned. "Told you we just had to grow horns." He keyed the radio. "Command, this is Red Dog 2. Be advised we're through. The Rhino runs." Static. Then a stunned voice replied. "Repeat that, Sergeant. You said you're through. Affirmative. Hedge is down. Send the rest." For the first time in weeks, the fields of Normandy didn't feel like cages anymore. They felt like doors waiting to be broken. The morning fog clung to the low fields like smoke. The hedgerows, ancient, tangled, defiant, steamed under the early sun. To the men of the 2nd Armored Division, it was another day of stalemate. To Sergeant Curtis Garth, it was the morning everything changed. His Rhino tank prototype sat in the lane, its welded prongs glistening with dew and soot. The steel teeth, jagged, ugly, improvised from bomb fragments and scrap from destroyed landing obstacles, gleamed faintly in the light. Captain Daniels approached with 2 engineers and a skeptical frown. "So this is it, the great contraption that's supposed to win the war?" Garth shrugged, wiping his hands on a rag. "If it works, sir, it just might." The captain circled the tank, inspecting the welded frame. "Looks like hell." "Hell's what it's made for," Garth said. "She's ugly, but she'll bite." Daniels turned to the engineers. "Well, gentlemen, what do you think?" One of them, Lieutenant Harold Fitch, scratched his chin. "If the welds hold, it could dig into the hedgerow base and split it. But it'll strain the transmission." Garth grinned. "I'll take strain over stalemate." They chose a test field at the edge of the village, an ordinary Norman pasture, surrounded by a centuries-old hedge that had already stalled 3 tanks that week. The men gathered to watch. Infantry leaned on rifles. Engineers held clipboards. Even a few locals, hollow-eyed farmers in tattered coats, stood at a distance. "Driver first gear," Garth ordered, climbing into the turret. Inside the tank, the crew was tense. Corporal Evans adjusted his goggles. "If this thing doesn't work, I'm walking back to Texas." "Then walk fast," Garth said. "Let's go." The engine roared. Mud churned beneath the treads. The Rhino's steel tusks lowered toward the hedgerow. Steady. Steady. Hit it. The impact was violent. The tank slammed into the base of the hedge, but instead of climbing, the prongs speared through the roots like a plow through earth. The wall shuddered, cracked, and then, to everyone's shock, split. Dirt cascaded. Branches snapped. The Sherman burst through the other side in a storm of green debris. For a moment there was silence. Then the watching soldiers erupted in cheers. Captain Daniels's jaw dropped. "Well, I'll be damned." Garth's voice crackled through the radio. "Red Dog 2 to command, obstacle cleared. Recommend field adaptation across the battalion." The reply came fast. "Say again, Sergeant. You cleared the hedge, affirmative. Repeat, the Rhino eats hedgerows for breakfast." Laughter broke out over the net. Someone whistled. Within the hour, word spread across the sector. Mechanics, engineers, and field welders swarmed the tanks like ants. Garth's crude invention, built from junk and stubbornness, was suddenly the most valuable tool in Normandy. By afternoon, the air around the 2nd Armored's camp was alive with the sound of blowtorches and hammers. Sparks flew in the fields as men scavenged scrap steel from wrecks, cutting and shaping it into prongs. The Rhino had been born, and it was reproducing. That night, the camp glowed orange under a canopy of smoke. Welding arcs lit up the hedgerows one after another. Men joked that the Germans would think the Americans were summoning lightning. Lieutenant Fitch supervised one group, his voice hoarse from shouting. "Angle the prongs lower. You want them biting into the roots, not the dirt." Nearby, Private Sammy Lopez, a young welder from Chicago, lifted his mask and yelled across the noise. "Hey, Sarge, how many of these you want?" Garth shouted back. "Enough to scare the devil out of Hitler." The men laughed. But beneath the jokes, there was awe. They could feel it. Something had shifted. For weeks, they'd been trapped in this maze, bleeding for every yard. Now, in a single night, they were building the keys to break free. By dawn, 40 tanks had been fitted with Rhino tusks. They rolled out from the assembly area under gray skies, engines rumbling. The sharp smell of hot steel and diesel hung in the air. Mechanics saluted as the column passed an improvised iron cavalry. Garth climbed onto his Sherman and looked out across the line. Each tank carried a different version of his creation, some with long, narrow prongs, others with jagged plates. None were identical, but all of them carried the same promise. Captain Daniels climbed onto the turret beside him. "You realize if this works, they'll make you famous, right?" Garth smirked. "If it works, I'll settle for getting out of these damn hedges." They moved toward the front at first light. Artillery thundered in the distance. The hedgerows ahead smoked from the night's bombardment, but the German positions still held. Infantry crouched in ditches watching the tanks roll by. One private shouted, "Hey, Rhino, go get 'em!" Garth grinned and keyed the intercom. "Driver, pick your hedge." The Sherman rumbled forward. The Rhino tusks gleamed. 3, 2, 1. Push it. The tank hit the wall. Wood splintered, dirt flew, and the entire section of hedge collapsed outward like paper. The infantry behind cheered and surged forward, firing into the next field. Over the radio, command's voice came through, breathless, disbelieving. "Red Dog column report. You've broken through." "That's a Roger, Garth," replied his voice steady. "We're not stopping now." The first Rhino charge in history had begun. By midday, entire companies were breaking through the hedgerows like floodwater. The Germans were caught off guard. Machine gun nests that had once dominated the lanes were suddenly flanked from behind. Mortar crews fired blindly, panicked. From his position on a ridge, Captain Daniels watched the map lines change one field at a time. He turned to Lieutenant Fitch and said, "You realize what this means? One sergeant's welding torch just changed the entire campaign." Fitch nodded slowly. "Crazy, isn't it?" Daniels smiled. "Crazy always wins wars." And that night after the breakthrough, Garth sat on the hull of his Sherman, watching the fires burn along the horizon. Evans climbed up beside him, handing over a canteen. "You think they'll give us a medal for this?" Garth took a long drink and wiped his mouth. Maybe, but I'll settle for a week without mud in my boots. They sat in silence, listening to the distant rumble of tanks, not stalled anymore, but moving. And somewhere in the dark, beyond the smoke, the hedgerows of Normandy began to fall like dominoes. The dawn broke with the smell of cordite and rain. The hedgerows ahead steamed from the night's bombardment, the fog curling through the gaps like ghosts. The ground trembled under the weight of engines warming up a low metallic growl rolling through the fields. Sergeant Curtis Garth stood atop his Sherman goggles pulled down, listening to the rhythm. To anyone else, it was chaos clanging. Hatches shouted orders, engines sputtering to life. To him, it was music, the sound of movement returning to a battlefield that had been frozen for weeks. Behind him stretched a line of Rhino Shermans 46 in all their welded tusks, glinting dull silver beneath the overcast sky. Each tank bore the scars of improvised construction, uneven welds, jagged cuts, scorch marks where sparks had kissed the steel. But to the men who crewed them, they were masterpieces. "Driver, you good?" From below came the reply, muffled by the engine's roar. "All green, Sarge. Let's tear some bushes." Garth grinned. "That's the spirit." At 0700 hours, the order came. The company frequency crackled Red Dog column advance on grid 517. Objective St. Lo Road Junction. Keep formation. Keep momentum. The tank treads bit into the mud, rolling forward in unison. Ahead, the first hedgerow waited like a sleeping beast, thick, green, ancient. Behind it, German machine gun nests and mortars. Normally, this would have been suicide. But today wasn't normal. "On my mark," Garth said into the intercom. 3, 2, 1, hit it. The Rhino surged forward. Its steel tusks slammed into the hedge, digging into the packed roots and soil. With a roar, the Sherman burst through the wall, tearing a man-sized hole clean through. Dirt and branches exploded outward. MG-42 tracers hissed overhead, but the tank didn't slow. Evans fired the main gun, one shell, one flash, one German gun position erased. "Clear," Evans shouted. "Next field," Garth barked. The second hedge fell faster than the first. Then the third. By the time the company reached the fourth, the men had stopped cheering now. It was just work, steady and relentless. They were cutting through centuries of earth and history, like reapers through wheat. Behind the tanks, infantry poured through the gaps, men of the 29th Infantry Division, mud-caked and wide-eyed. They sprinted behind the moving Shermans, firing as they ran. Private Hank Delaney, 19 and terrified, stumbled into the open and ducked behind Garth's tank. He looked up at the welded tusks and muttered, "God bless that crazy bastard who made this thing." Inside, Garth couldn't hear him, but if he had, he might have laughed. The field radios crackled with excitement. Rhinos breaking through on the left flank, requesting reinforcement at grid 41. They're running, the Jerrys are actually running. By midday, a 6-mile front that had been static for a month was in motion. The hedgerows that had broken tank after tank were collapsing under the Rhinos' charge. At division headquarters, the change was immediate. Maps once filled with stalled arrows now surged forward. General Collins leaned over the operations table, cigar smoke curling around him. "Who authorized this?" he asked, half amazed, half incredulous. Captain Daniels, still dusty from the front, stood at attention. "Sergeant Curtis Garth, sir, 2nd Armored, came up with the welding modification himself." Collins squinted at the young officer. "A sergeant built this in the field." "Yes, sir. Out of scrap." The general chuckled. "Well, I'll be damned. Tell that man he's just turned Normandy into Kansas farmland." Everyone in the room laughed, not out of mockery, but relief. For the first time since D-Day, there was hope that this green labyrinth could be broken. Back at the front, Garth's tank sat in the ruins of another field, its armor streaked with dirt and ash. Smoke drifted over the landscape. In the distance, artillery thumped, steady, rhythmic, inevitable. Evans climbed out of the hatch, coughing. "We're low on ammo again." "Then we'll use the treads," Garth said, lighting a cigarette. "We got all the bullets we need right here." He gestured at the rhinos lined up across the field. Their tusks glowed faintly orange from heat. They looked alive beasts made of metal and stubbornness. Private Lopez jogged up, waving a clipboard. "Sir Captain says you're to report to Battalion HQ ASAP." HQ Garth frowned. Why, Lopez shrugged. Something about generals wanting to see the crazy bastard who broke France. The trip back through the lines was surreal. Everywhere he went, soldiers stopped what they were doing to stare at his tank, at the crude steel horns jutting from its front. Some saluted, some cheered. Others just grinned and nodded. One corporal shouted, "Hey, Rhino, you gonna sell those things after the war?" Garth waved, smiling. "Sure. Comes with a free German machine gun stuck in the grill." Even the exhausted engineers cracked smiles. They'd been cutting and welding non-stop for 2 days, building Rhinos out of every tank they could get their hands on. The idea had spread faster than orders could be written. Across the Normandy front, from the Americans at St. Lo to the British near Caen Mechanics, were improvising their own versions. It wasn't just a weapon now. It was a movement. At headquarters, Captain Daniels met him outside a commandeered farmhouse. "You're about to meet the brass," he said, straightening his jacket. "Try not to insult anyone with stars on their shoulders." "No promises," Garth muttered. Inside, the room smelled of maps and tobacco. General Collins himself stood by the window, peering through binoculars toward the smoke on the horizon. So the general said without turning, "You're the man who decided to turn our tanks into farm equipment." Garth stood stiffly. "Yes, sir. Figured it was time we stopped letting the hedges do all the fighting." Collins turned, smiling faintly. "Well, Sergeant, congratulations. You've just won the first war fought with a plow." The men around the table laughed, but there was admiration in their eyes. That evening, a radio broadcast went out to all commands in the sector. Effective immediately, all armored units are to fit tanks with hedgerow cutting devices modeled on the 2nd Armored Division's prototype codenamed Rhino. Field welding authorized at division discretion. The message spread faster than rumors. In every bivouac and depot, sparks lit up the night once again. In his tent, Garth lay awake, staring at the canvas above. The sound of welding echoed faintly from the fields. He smiled to himself. "Crazy gets results," he whispered before drifting into sleep. By dawn, the fields of Normandy were alive with the roar of engines and the thunder of tracks. The hedgerows were no longer walls. They were targets. And behind every one of them somewhere, the Germans were learning that even in war, one man's idea can change everything. The morning mist lay heavy on the fields, curling low over the shattered hedgerows. The countryside that had once trapped Allied armor was now unrecognizable, gouged earth, crushed roots, splintered branches. Where there had been barriers, there were now corridors of mud and smoke. Sergeant Curtis Garth leaned from the hatch of his Sherman, scanning the fog. The tank's Rhino prongs were dented and blackened, still hot from the last push. Around him, the sound of engines revving, treads grinding, and distant artillery formed a symphony of controlled chaos. "Feels different now," Corporal Evans muttered. Garth nodded. "Yeah, the fields aren't fighting us anymore." Ahead, Lieutenant Harper's voice crackled over the radio. "All Red Dog elements were pushing to Hill 192. Expect heavy resistance. The Jerrys know we've found a way through." Garth smirked, lighting a cigarette. "Let 'em know. Maybe they'll build a bigger hedge next time." He dropped back inside, sealing the hatch with a metallic thunk. "Driver forward. Let's make some history." The column rolled forward, 30 Rhinos in formation. Each tank carved its own path through the dense bocage. Tusks dug and tore through roots like claws. To the Germans, it must have seemed like madness, tanks charging through terrain they had counted on as protection. The first Panzerfausts fired wildly, but most missed. Evans worked the gun in a steady rhythm woed. Fire, traverse, fire. That's 3 nests down. Keep your head in it, Garth snapped. We're just getting started. Through the slit, he saw a farmhouse erupt in flames. Beyond it, more hedgerows, more fields, but this time the sight didn't bring dread. It brought determination. Every time the Rhino tusks hit the earth, another wall came down. Behind them, infantry advanced in waves. Men of the 29th and 35th Divisions moved through the gaps, rifles ready. Their rhythm was different now, faster, steadier, synchronized with the tanks ahead. Private Hank Delaney sprinted behind the lead Sherman, calling it a miracle on tracks. Each breach gave them another 100 yards of ground, another step toward St. Lo. From the radios came updates, Blue Company through Field 117. Enemy counterfire diminishing. For the first time, the chatter sounded like progress instead of despair. At midday, the clouds broke. Sunlight spilled across the shattered fields, breathtaking and terrible. The bocage turned to smoke and churned mud. Captain Daniels rode up in a jeep, waving. "How's she holding?" "She bites better than ever, sir," Garth replied. "The only thing slowing us down is waiting for the others to catch up." Daniels grinned. "Good. Keep the pressure up. HQ says we're cracking the German line wide open. The brass is calling it a mechanized breakthrough. Fancy way of saying we're finally doing our jobs," Garth said. Daniels pointed to the distant ridge. "You see that rise, Hill 192? Take it and St. Lo's ours." Garth stared at the hill gray under drifting smoke. "Then let's not make them wait." By afternoon, the push was in full swing. The Germans threw mortars, MGs, even artillery, but it wasn't enough. The Americans had found their rhythm, their momentum, their will. A panther appeared from a hedgerow cannon swiveling. The shell screamed past. Panther front, left, pivot right. Loader AP Evans fired the shot, tore through flame erupting. "Scratch one cat," Evans yelled. "Enemy armor down on left flank. Keep pushing." The Rhinos didn't stop. Dusk fell as the Allied line crested the lower slopes of Hill 192, the air thick with smoke and gunfire. The Rhino tusks met one last hedge, the thickest yet. Garth glanced at the map, then the sky. "One more wall, boys. Let's end it." The Sherman roared, gears grinding. The Rhino slammed through shredding roots and soil. For a moment, it nearly stalled. Then the wall collapsed, sliding outward in a wave of dirt. The path to the summit was open. By nightfall, Hill 192 was in American hands. Radio chatter filled the air. "Hill secured. Repeat, Hill secured. Enemy retreating east." Captain Daniels climbed up the slope to Garth's tank. "You did it, Sergeant. Operation Cobra goes ahead on schedule." Garth climbed out, covered in mud, staring down the valley, a sea of smoke and broken hedges. "About damn time," he muttered. Evans said, "We turned this place from a prison into a highway." "And tomorrow," Garth replied, "we'll drive all the way through." That night, Garth sat beside the tank, welding torch in hand. The Rhino tusks were bent, cracked, one nearly broken off. He ran his hand over the metal. "You got us this far, old girl. Let's get you ready for tomorrow." The torch flared bright against the dark. Sparks danced across the hull like fireflies. Beyond the fields, the guns of Normandy rumbled into the night, but for the first time they sounded like victory. 3 days after the fall of Hill 192, the skies above Normandy were no longer gray with smoke, but trembling with thunder, Allied thunder. Columns of tanks rolled through open fields no longer bound by ancient green walls. Trails of crushed hedgerows and broken ambush sites stretched behind them. What had been stalemate became a rolling offensive. Inside, his Sherman sergeant, Curtis Garth, checked the fuel gauge. Still running strong. "How's she holding Evans better than me?" Evans said. "Haven't slept in 2 days. Haven't stopped smiling in 1. "Don't get comfortable," Garth warned. "We're not done yet." Ahead, radio chatter filled the air. Rhino columns reporting full advance along St. Lo Highway. Defenses breaking south of Le Désert. Command authorizes push toward Perrier. Repeat, Perrier. The long-awaited breakout from the bocage was underway. From the air, the transformation was staggering. Aerial recon showed hundreds of breaches forming a network of armored lanes. Each gap bore the mark of Garth's idea: crude steel tusks welded to tanks. Even German reports noted confusion. Americans employ armored plows capable of uprooting entire walls of earth. To the men below, it felt like liberation. They were no longer boxed in, they were hunting. By July 7th, the 2nd Armored Division spearheaded the drive southwest of St. Lo. The roads were jammed with convoys, jeeps, half-tracks, bulldozers, all moving with unstoppable rhythm. Captain Daniels shouted from his jeep, "Garth wants you leading Cobra tomorrow." "Front of Cobra." Garth blinked. "That's right," Daniels said. "You're the tip of the spear now." Garth laughed. "A week ago we couldn't move 10 yards. Now we're invading France." "Funny what a welding torch can do," Daniels replied. That night, the fields outside St. Lo glowed with torchlight again. The camp became a forge. Sparks flew as engineers welded Rhino tusks to tanks across the valley. Private Lopez wiped sweat from his brow. "Hey, Sarge. Brits built one too, called it a hedgehog, yeah?" Garth grinned. "Let's see if it bites half as hard." Lieutenant Fitch shouted over the noise. "We're standardizing the design 4 tusks 30-degree angle." Garth smirked. "Tell 'em not to mass produce yet. We'll finish before they start printing manuals." At dawn on July 8th, the world shook. Nearly 3,000 bombers thundered overhead. The ground trembled, the horizon burned. Evans whispered, "You could see that from Berlin." Garth checked his watch. "When the smoke clears, we roll." When it did, the German line was gone, replaced by craters and silence. Red Dog column advance. Let's open this road. The Rhinos surged forward. Hedgerows still standing fell within seconds. Tanks rolled through wreckage and villages reduced to rubble. Resistance was desperate and short-lived. Private Delaney shouted from a half-track, "We're not crawling anymore. We're flying." By mid-afternoon, the 2nd Armored advanced farther in 1 day than in the last month. The U.S. flag rose over Le Désert. The road to Avranches lay open, the gateway to Brittany. That night, Garth sat beside his tank, the Rhino tusks scorched, but unbroken. Evans handed him coffee. "They'll write manuals about this thing." "Manuals are for people who wait for permission," Garth said. "We just stopped waiting." In a bunker near Cannes, German officer Dieter Kraus dictated, "Enemy armor now moves freely. Hedgerow defenses no longer hold. Recommend withdrawal." He whispered, "They turned the earth itself against us." In Washington, a cable arrived. Local innovation by Field Sergeant resulted in major breakthrough. Recommend commendation. It was dry, but behind it lay the truth: one man's torch changed the war. By midnight, rain fell softly, washing smoke from the fields. Garth leaned against the tank, eyes half closed. "We made the land ours again," he murmured. "Nah," Evans said, "you gave her teeth." Thunder rolled in the distance. The last fires of the bocage flickered out. The hedgerow country of Normandy, once thought unbreakable, was open. And in the silence that followed, the steady drip of rain on steel echoed like applause. By the time Operation Cobra began, the rhythm of the Normandy campaign had changed. What was once a crawl through mud became a synchronized storm of steel and fire. At the heart of it all were the Rhinos' improvised tusks of welded iron that turned terrain into opportunity. Sergeant Curtis Garth leaned from the Sherman's hatch as the earth quaked beneath him. Above the sky boiled with bombers, B-17s, B-24s, and P-47, thunderbolts diving low. It was July 25th, and the largest air bombardment on the Western Front was underway. "Keep your heads down," Garth shouted. Even from miles back, blast waves rolled through the tank. Evans muttered, "Feels like the world's ending." "It is," Garth said. "For them." When the bombing stopped, silence hung heavy. Smoke and ash filled the air. Then came the order, "All Rhino elements advance." Cobra is in motion. Engines roared to life. One by one, the Rhinos lurched forward through fog tusks gleaming with soot. "Driver straight ahead," Garth commanded. "We're clearing the highway to Coutances." The Sherman growled forward. The tusks bit into the soil, tearing through roots. The land ahead looked alien: craters, blackened trees, twisted rebar. The Panzer Lehr division was regrouping too late. Artillery rolled close behind, laying a creeping barrage. Infantry dashed between tanks, faces streaked with grime. Private Hank Delaney shouted, "Stay close to the Rhinos!" Machine guns opened from a ruined farmhouse. Evans fired. The shell hit dead center. The structure vanished in flame. "Scratch another," he said flatly, hands steady from repetition. The radio crackled, "Maintain momentum. No halts until the line breaks." "Copy that," Garth replied. "Let's make this count." For the first time, the Germans couldn't stop them. The Rhinos cut through hedgerows like blades. Panzerfausts missed 88s fired too late. Platoons were surrounded before they knew it. One German survivor later wrote, "They came through like beasts. They weren't fighting us, they were devouring the land itself." By noon, the 2nd Armored had torn a hole miles wide. At 1400 hours, Garth's tank reached a ridge. Beyond it, open plains stretching toward Brittany. He removed his helmet. "Would you look at that?" No more walls. "So what now?" Evans asked. Now Garth said, "We drive." The order spread. Breakout confirmed. Full advance to Coutances. Convoys surged forward. Jeeps, half-tracks, tank destroyers. The flood began. Captain Daniels radioed Garth, "You're leading the 1st Armored Column into open France." "Guess I should have brought a map," Garth joked. "Doesn't matter," Daniels said. "We're making our own roads." The speed stunned command. In 24 hours, the Allies gained more ground than in a month. By July 27th, the German front had collapsed. The Panzer Lehr fell back under endless airstrikes. From above, pilots reported tanks moving in perfect synchronization. On the ground, infantry called them Cobra's tusks. The Rhinos were no longer improvisation. They were the symbol of victory. That night, under a red sky of burning fuel, Garth sat beside his tank. The tusks were worn to nubs, dented and scarred, but unbroken. Evans lit a cigarette. "Think they'll remember this, Sarge?" Garth looked out at France stretching ahead. "They'll remember the victory," he said. "Not the guy with the torch." Evans chuckled. "Without that torch, we'd still be stuck in St. Lo." At Allied HQ, General Bradley studied the map. Arrows of the breakout cut deep into France. "This all started with one idea," he said. "Whose idea, sir, doesn't matter," Bradley replied. It worked. In the fields of Normandy, the last hedgerows smoldered. Smoke and victory hung in the air. A handful of tanks with welded tusks rolled forward into France, into history, into legend. By the end of July, the bocage, the green hell that swallowed men and machines, lay behind them. The road ahead was open wide and warm with promise. Sergeant Curtis Garth hadn't slept in days. His hands were burned, his face dark with soot. But his grin stayed. The convoy rolled into Coutances, a bombed-out town smelling of cordite and diesel. Tanks idled among ruins as infantry cleared the streets. Overhead P-47s droned low, hunting German convoys. "Smells like victory," Evans muttered. "Smells like hot engines and dead hedges," Garth said. "Same thing, Sarge." Across the plaza, the 2nd Armored regrouped. Mechanics, tankers, and engineers laughed, smoked, compared scars. Every tank told a story. twisted tusks scorched paint-patched armor. Captain Daniels arrived with a clipboard. Ordnance crew from Cherbourg's on the way. They want blueprints of your contraption. Nameplate too, Garth said. What's it gonna say, built in a mud hole under fire? Daniels chuckled. You've got half the army calling it yours. I just welded junk, Garth replied. The men made it work. Maybe, Daniels said. But the brass wants to meet you. A jeep arrived. 2 officers stepped out, Colonel Emerson of Ordnance and Mr. Keller from the War Department. Sergeant Garth. That's me. You built the first Rhino, built a first one. The rest built themselves. Keller smiled. How did it come to you? Wasn't a plan, Garth said. Wasn't a miracle. Just a problem that needed fixing. Steel doesn't care what side it's on. They crawled under the tank, measuring welds. Emerson stood. We'll replicate this across all divisions. Your name goes in the logbook. Garth frowned. That's not what I built it for. Keller asked, then what did you build it for? Garth looked toward the road where tanks waited. To get us home faster. The officers exchanged a quiet look of respect. That night, sparks flew as welders refitted new Rhinos. Evans handed Garth a cigarette. You hear what they're calling you, the man with the torch. Garth laughed. I just lit the mud on fire. Doesn't matter, Evans said. You gave us a way out. At midnight, Garth walked alone through the silent fields. The hedges were gone, replaced by open ground and wreckage. He knelt, running his fingers through soft, blackened soil. We're through, boys, he whispered. You can rest now. Above him, faint stars shimmered through the smoke. Next morning, new orders spearhead to Avranches. Daniels handed Garth an envelope. You've been recommended for a citation. For doing my job, for changing the job. Fix your tusks, Daniels said. France isn't done with you. Garth climbed into the hatch. Driver, he said, let's remind him why they call us Rhinos. The tank roared forward, steel and thunder merging into one. The bocage was gone. The war was moving. The road to Paris and victory lay ahead. Behind them in captured towns, French farmers watched the strange beasts roll by American tanks with horns of steel and hearts of fire. The roar of engines echoed through the valleys of Normandy like an approaching storm. The Allied war machine was finally loose, unleashed, and moving fast. Sergeant Curtis Garth stood in his Sherman's hatch, goggles gleaming. Ahead stretched miles of cracked French road. Each explosion in the distance marked another German line collapsing. Feels strange, don't it? Evans said. Moving this fast without a hedge in front of us. Let it try, Garth grinned. We taught the dirt who's boss. The 2nd Armored led the charge, flanked by the 4th Infantry and 3rd Armored. Convoys of trucks and bulldozers poured through the gap Garth's Rhinos had opened. They were bound for Avranches Quay to breaking into Brittany. Red Dog 2 to command, Garth radioed. Route D7 clear, moving 20 miles per hour, 20. In Normandy came the reply. Affirmative, Garth smiled. Guess we're breaking records. By midday they reached Le Mesnil-Gilbert, a ghost village of ruins and dust. French civilians emerged from cellars. An old woman waved a torn tricolor. Vive les Américains! Evans waved back. We fight through hell, and they still have flags, he said. Means we're doing it right, Garth replied. Children ran behind the tanks, laughing. One boy touched the Rhino tusks before darting away. For the first time in months, the sound of war carried joy. But ahead lay danger. Recon warned that remnants of the German 2nd Parachute Corps were regrouping near Avranches, guarding the Say River bridges. Captain Daniels radioed Garth, your Rhinos are on point. Take that bridge by dawn. Understood, Garth replied. You hear that, boys? We're taking a bridge tonight. Evans groaned. You had to say it. At dusk, they approached the river valley. Flares burst overhead, red and green streaks. Lights off low gear, Garth ordered. Machine guns opened from ahead. Contact front, Evans shouted. Gunner he shell, the night exploded. Mortars whistled down. The rhinos advanced through the last hedges, tusks glinting in the flare light. Keep moving, Garth yelled. If we stop, we die. A German Pak-40 fired missed. Garth's return shot silenced it. The bridge came into view through smoke. Bridge in sight, Evans cried. Then let's grab it before Jerry remembers how to aim. The rhinos charged. Bullets pinged off armor as they thundered onto the stone arches. Halfway across, a shell hit the rail. Shrapnel flew. They're trying to drop the span, Evans yelled. Then we move faster, Garth shouted. Full throttle. The Sherman lunged forward, bridge shaking under its weight. The structure held. On the far side, German fire faltered, then stopped. The enemy was gone. Red Dog 2 to command. Bridge secure. Static. Then a quiet reply. Copy that, Red Dog. You've opened the gate to Brittany. Evans laughed. We're officially out of Normandy. Yeah, Garth said softly. Feels strange, like we broke free from the ground itself. That night, the tanks rested beyond the bridge engines, cooling in the dark. Captain Daniels joined Garth on the hull. This bridge will be on every map from here to Washington. Hope they draw it straight, Garth said. It sure didn't feel that way. You'll get your medal soon, Daniels said. Garth shook his head. Don't need one. Just a grinder and some quiet. Daniels smiled. Peace is still a long way off. The wind carried the faint smell of the sea. Garth tilted his head. One step closer to home. The metal under him hummed softly, like something alive. For the first time since the invasion, the land was open, flat, and free of walls. The bocage was behind them. The road to victory lay ahead. The first rays of dawn spilled across the western hills, painting the wreckage of war in soft gold. Engines rumbled through the mist, hundreds rolling like thunder. Sergeant Curtis Garth stood beside his Sherman, staring west toward Brittany. For weeks, every field and hedge had been a trap, now open land stretched forever. Feels like we've been fighting inside a tunnel, Evans said. Now the tunnel's gone. Yeah, Garth murmured. Now we see what we were fighting for. Behind them, columns of tanks and trucks streamed down the road toward Avranches, a river of steel in motion. The Allied machine no longer crawled. It flowed. Radio chatter crackled. Cobra spearhead confirmed breach. Highway clear to Rennes. The bocage war was over. The rhinos had torn open the cage that trapped an army. Garth climbed onto his Sherman cigarette between his lips. The tusks were dented black with soot, the same steel that started it all. Think they'll remember us? Evans asked. They'll remember the breakthrough, Garth said. They won't remember the torch. Evans smiled. That's war. The names fade, the steel stays. By midday, 2nd Armored entered Avranches. French flags fluttered from shattered windows. Civilians waved, children ran beside the tanks, laughter echoing through ruins. Captain Daniels leaned from his jeep. We did it, Garth. We're through. Garth smiled faintly. Through one line, sir. There'll be more. Always more, Daniels said. They looked west, the long road to Rennes and Brest. The route of liberation. That night, the tanks rested on a ridge, moonlight gleaming on their battered hulls. Evans asked, You ever think about after the war? Yeah. Back to barns and tractors. Garth smiled. Maybe. Welding's the same anywhere, fix what's broken. Evans laughed. Then you're the world's deadliest repairman. Meanwhile, in Berlin, a report reached Albert Speer, Allied mobility increasing exponentially. Terrain obstacles ineffective. Speer frowned. Improvised engineering defeating our barriers? He sighed. That's not industry. That's ingenuity. And we can't outproduce ingenuity. Back in Avranches, 2nd Armored toasted with ration whiskey. Lopez raised his canteen. To the crazy bastard who gave tanks horns, laughter rolled through the camp. Evans smirked. Go on, Sarge, take the credit. Garth lifted his drink. To the boys who made the steel sing. Helmets clanged, voices roared. For a moment, the war felt far away. Next morning, new orders advanced to Rennes. Daniels pointed at the map. This is it, the chase begins. Hope the Rhinos can run as well as they fight, Garth said. They can, Daniels replied. Engines thundered alive. Red Dog column ready to roll, Garth radioed. Let's see what freedom feels like. The tanks surged forward. Dust rose behind them. The welded tusks caught sunlight, dulled, battered, still sharp. No longer tools of desperation, but symbols of victory. At HQ, a signalman read the latest report. Second armored on open terrain. Enemy retreating. Momentum unbroken. The general smiled. All thanks to a sergeant with a torch. He chuckled. Then send him a better one. That night, Garth stood alone on the ridge Avranches, glowing behind him, engines humming faintly below. He patted the tank's armor. You did it, old girl. You tore down a country and built a road instead. He climbed inside, sealing the hatch. The engine rumbled. The Rhinos rolled west through the night, through France, and into legend. The thunder of tracks had become the heartbeat of France. Every road west of St. Lo now pulsed with steel engines and victory. Where once the Allied front crawled yard by yard, it now surged mile by mile. Garth's Sherman battered soot-streaked, lead the spearhead toward Rennes. Dust clouds followed like ghosts. P-47 Thunderbolts flew lazy arcs overhead, hunting stragglers. You ever think we'd move this fast? Sarge Evans asked. I thought we'd be old men before open ground, Garth said, grinning. He keyed the radio. Red Dog 2 to command. 10 clicks from Rennes. Locals waving flags. The voice on the other end crackled. Copy that, Red Dog. Godspeed. They rolled through hamlets untouched by war-green fields, barns still standing. Farmers paused their plows. Children waved chasing tanks until the dust swallowed them. A young girl offered wildflowers. Garth smiled faintly through the periscope. It struck him they weren't just breaking land. They were breaking time. Evans noticed his silence. Funny how it takes tanks to make peace, he said. Garth replied, and a guy with a welding torch. By noon they reached Rennes, smoking rooftops, flags waving. Civilians cheered and threw flowers. Vive l'Amérique, voices cried. Vive la liberté, Private Delaney laughed. They don't cheer like this back home. Hold at the square, Daniels radioed. Free French are joining us. Understood, Garth said. In the square, crowds swarmed the tanks, offering bread and wine. A woman kissed the Sherman's armor. Evans chuckled. Think she likes the old girl? She earned it, Garth said. As dusk fell, church bells rang, first time in 4 years over the sound of engines. For the men of 2nd Armored, it was the sound of everything they'd fought for. In Berlin, panic reigned. Von Klug slammed his fist. They're moving too fast. An aide stammered. They've modified their tanks, sir, cutting devices improvised. The Americans don't fight by the book, von Kluge muttered. They rewrite it. Back in Rennes, Daniels and Garth studied a map under the glow of fires. We've done it, Sarge. Next stop, Paris. Paris, Garth said, astonished. That's right. If it rolls, it goes. That night the men camped under stars. Fireflies shimmered like sparks over the sleeping Rhinos. Private Lopez handed Garth a bottle of wine. You built us a road. You earned it. Garth passed it back. Pour it for the boys. They built it too. Evans raised his cup. To the Rhino, the beast that busted Europe open. The men cheered softly, cups clinking in the dark. At dawn, a courier jeep brought orders. Daniels read them Sergeant Curtis Garth recommended for Bronze Star for gallantry and ingenuity. Garth frowned. A medal for welding. Daniels smiled. A medal for changing a war. All right then, Garth said. Let's earn it twice. As they moved out, Wren rang with bells and cheers. Evans looked back. Crazy how history starts in a mud pit with a torch. That's where it always starts, Garth said. The tank rumbled forward, joining the endless line stretching toward the sunrise. The floodgates of France were open, and the man who had built them and broken them led the charge into legend. The road east shimmered in the heat. France was opening before them, field after field flashing by beneath the tracks. Sunflowers, vineyards, the pale ruins of farmhouses left behind by the retreating Germans. Dust rose in sheets behind the armored columns, and in that dust marched an idea as powerful as any weapon momentum. Sergeant Curtis Garth's Sherman led the way, its once savage rhino tusks, now worn and bent, caked with weeks of earth. The crude steel that had begun as desperation had become a banner, an icon of ingenuity. Inside the turret, Evans wiped the sweat from his brow. You ever think how far we've come since St. Lo? Garth laughed quietly. Back then I thought we'd die in those hedges. Now we can't stop moving. Yeah, Evans said. Feels like the land itself's finally on our side. The convoy stretched for miles. Jeeps, half-tracks supply trucks the arteries of victory. Along the roadside, liberated villagers waved flags and tossed flowers into the path of the tanks. A little boy ran beside Garth's Sherman barefoot, waving an American flag stitched from rags. He shouted, "Merci, merci, soldats." Garth looked down and raised his hand in salute. The boy beamed. Think he knows what we're saying? Evans asked. Doesn't matter, Garth said. He knows what we did. Behind them, the sky was streaked with contrails P-51s sweeping overhead, covering the advance. Ahead, the spires of distant towns shimmered in the haze, each one another step closer to Paris. By afternoon, they reached Le Mans, where the Allies encircled the shattered remnants of the German 7th Army. The fields beyond were littered with burned-out tanks, smoking trucks, and abandoned guns. Captain Daniels met Garth at a crossroads, map in hand. We've cut off their retreat. They're calling this the Falaise Pocket. You know what that means, Sergeant. Garth squinted toward the horizon. It means they're trapped and we're done chasing. Daniels nodded. The Rhinos made it possible. We broke them in Normandy, we finished them here. Evans leaned out of the hatch. So, Paris next. Daniels smiled. If we can keep the gas flowing. That night, under a sky bright with tracer fire and moonlight, the men camped among the ruins of a wheat field. The hum of generators and distant artillery filled the air like a lullaby. Private Lopez sat beside the tank hands, blackened from another round of field repairs. You know, Sarge, he said, my ma always said nothing good comes from welding after midnight. Garth grinned. Guess she never fought a war. Lopez laughed. Guess not. They sat in silence, the glow of a cigarette ember the only light between them. Beyond the hills, the muffled roar of battle rolled like thunder. Evans's voice floated from the turret above. You ever think about what happens when we get home? Garth looked at the tank, its tusks gleaming faintly in the dark. Yeah, he said softly. We'll have to learn how to stop building weapons and start building peace. The next morning brought word that the Falaise Pocket had closed. More than 50,000 German soldiers were captured or killed, the death knell of the Wehrmacht in France. At Division HQ, General Collins gathered the officers and NCOs. His voice was calm but fierce. Gentlemen, we've done in 6 weeks what no army has done in centuries, turned the heart of Europe's strongest fortress into an open road. He looked directly at Garth. And you, Sergeant, you taught us how to fight the land itself. Garth shifted awkwardly, scratching the back of his neck. Just got tired of dying in the mud, sir. Colin smiled. That's how progress always starts. 2 days later, the column reached Chartres, just 70 miles from Paris. The Germans were falling back in chaos now. Convoys of wrecked vehicles burning on the horizon. The French resistance had risen in the cities, cutting rail lines, sabotaging bridges. For the men of the 2nd Armored, every mile felt like a heartbeat. They could sense it, the end of something vast. Evans leaned forward in the turret. "Sarge, look at that." Ahead, a group of French villagers stood by the roadside holding a sign painted on cardboard, "Paris next." Garth smiled. "They've got better intel than command." The men laughed, the tension easing. For a moment, war felt almost human again. That night, Garth climbed out of the hatch and stood on the tank looking east. In the distance, faint flashes lit up the horizon, the last battles before Paris. He took a deep breath. The air was warmer now, freer. Evans joined him, handing over a battered tin cup filled with weak coffee. "You ever think they'll build statues for us?" Garth shook his head. "Statues don't build themselves. People do. Same as wars. Same as peace." Evans chuckled. "You sound like a preacher, Sarge." Maybe, Garth said, looking east again. "But I'd settle for a welder with steady hands." In Berlin that same night, Albert Speer stared at another grim report: industrial collapse, rail strikes, fuel shortages, and the unstoppable Allied advance. He leaned back in his chair and whispered, "They've turned improvisation into doctrine." The war he had promised to sustain through efficiency was being undone by creativity. In that moment, Speer understood that Germany was not just losing a war of weapons, it was losing a war of imagination. Back in France, under a sky filled with stars and the faint hum of engines cooling, Garth sat beside his tank and touched the Rhino tusks one last time. The metal was cold rough beneath his calloused fingers. "This old beast," he whispered, "she changed everything." Evans's voice drifted from inside the tank. "You talking to the Rhino again?" Garth smiled. "Yeah. She listens better than most officers." Evans laughed. "Don't let Daniels hear you say that." But Garth wasn't joking. Machines never judged, never hesitated. They just did what you made them do. And sometimes that was enough to change history. At sunrise, the order came through. 2nd Armored to advance. Objective, Paris. The engines roared to life once again. The tanks rolled east, their tracks cutting through the dust like history carving its path. And as they moved, the Rhino tusks, those welded shards of desperate brilliance, glinted in the dawn, leading the way to the heart of a free France. The morning fog clung to the fields like smoke from a dying fire. The 2nd Armored Division had been driving for days with hardly any sleep, but no one complained, not when every mile brought them closer to Paris. Sergeant Curtis Garth's Sherman rumbled along a narrow road, bordered by trees blasted to splinters. The Rhino tusks at its prow were chipped and blackened, the weld seams cracked in places, but still holding firm. "Feels different today," Evans said from the turret, scanning the horizon. Garth nodded. "Yeah, like the air knows." They both fell silent. Ahead lay the city of light, occupied, wounded, defiant. Rumors whispered through every column the French were rising. Barricades were up, the Germans were crumbling. Garth looked down at his hands. They were scarred, burnt, ingrained with soot that no amount of washing could remove. The hands of a builder turned into the hands of a breaker, and maybe he thought soon to be a builder again. The column halted outside a crossroads near Versailles, where Captain Daniels gathered the platoon commanders. His uniform was filthy eyes sunken from days of no rest, but his voice carried like a bell. "Men, this is it. The order just came down from General Leclerc. We're going in today." A murmur rippled through the group. Daniels jabbed at the map, spread across a jeep hood. "The Free French are already fighting in the city. Resistance units have taken the prefecture and the Hôtel de Ville. The Germans are trying to destroy the bridges, but they're scattered. We move at first light. Objective, the heart of Paris. He looked around. You've all earned this moment. Don't let up now. Garth glanced at the map, tracing the red line into the city. His gut tightened. Paris, a place still standing, still beautiful, waiting to be free. As dawn broke, the tanks rolled forward again, engines roaring beneath the golden sky. The column stretched for miles, dust clouds curling behind them. Villagers lined the roads, waving flags, throwing flowers. A French priest stood beside a ruined chapel, blessing each tank as it passed. When Garth's Sherman rolled by, the priest lifted his hand and whispered, "Dieu vous garde. God keep you." Garth nodded. He's had his hands full lately. Evans laughed softly. Guess he's got a soft spot for welders. By noon, the column hit the outskirts of Paris. Smoke rose over the rooftops. Gunfire echoed between the boulevards. The French resistance was in full revolt, men and women with rifles, armbands, and pure fury in their eyes. As the tanks advanced, crowds surged from side streets, cheering, crying, waving flags. Some climbed onto the Shermans shouting, "Les Américains, les Libérateurs." Evans leaned out, shouting back, "We're just visiting." Garth couldn't help but smile. He'd spent months buried in mud and blood, and now somehow he was rolling through a sea of joy. A young woman ran beside the tank, clutching a small tricolor flag. She shouted something in French, then threw a rose onto the armor. It landed right beside the welded rhino tusks, red against rusted steel. Garth stared at it for a long moment. Hell, he muttered, guess even monsters get flowers. The fighting in the city grew heavier as they approached the Seine. German pockets resisted fiercely, machine gun nests in buildings, snipers in church towers. Daniels's voice crackled over the radio, "Red Dog, take your section up Rue de Rivoli. Support the French armor near the Tuileries." "Roger that," Garth replied. The Sherman's turret swung left. Its gun barked once, twice the recoil, shaking the hull as masonry exploded ahead. The street filled with echoes, smoke, and the cries of liberation. "Clear," Evans shouted. The Rhino tank surged forward again, smashing through a barricade of overturned cars. French fighters waved from windows, shouting, "Bravo, bravo." Evans grinned. "We're in history books now, Sarge." "Yeah," Garth said, eyes fixed ahead. "Let's make sure we're on the right page." By evening, the gunfire began to fade. Word spread like wildfire the German garrison was surrendering. Crowds poured into the streets, flooding around the Allied columns. Bells rang from Notre Dame. Flags covered every building, every balcony. It was chaos, joyous, uncontrollable chaos. Captain Daniels climbed onto Garth's Sherman, raising his arm. "Men," he shouted above the noise. "This is it! Paris is free!" The roar that followed drowned out even the engines. Evans slapped Garth's shoulder. "We made it, boss." Garth nodded, but his expression stayed distant. "We didn't free a city," he said quietly. "We freed the road that led to it." That night, under the warm glow of Parisian lights, the tanks idled beside the Seine. The bridges were intact. The water reflected the flicker of liberation fires and fireworks alike. Garth sat on the hull of his Sherman cigarette, glowing in the dark. The rose from earlier still rested on the rhino tusks, wilted but red. Evans joined him. "You gonna keep it, yeah?" Garth said. "A reminder. Steel breaks things. People fix 'em." They sat in silence for a long time, listening to the faint echoes of celebration drifting through the night. Finally, Garth said, "You know, Evans, they called these things rhinos." "Yeah, but maybe they were more like keys." Evans looked puzzled. "Keys, yeah," Garth said, smiling faintly. "Keys that unlocked a country." In Berlin, the final reports from France arrived on Hitler's desk. He scanned them in silence, broken fronts, collapsing divisions, the fall of Paris. At the bottom of one page, a note caught his eye. "Enemy armored divisions exhibiting rapid mobility despite terrain. Improvised armor modifications observed." He frowned, muttering "improvised," before throwing the paper aside. But by then, it was already too late. Back on the banks of the Seine, the Rhino tank sat gleaming under the rising moon, battered, burned, but unbroken. And somewhere beneath the noise of celebration, the faint hum of a welding torch still echoed in memory the spark that had changed the course of a war. Weeks had passed since Paris fell back into the hands of the free world. The city was still scarred bullet holes in its marble walls, bridges blackened with smoke, but life had returned. Markets reopened. Cafes poured coffee again. Street musicians played beneath the Eiffel Tower for the first time in years. Sergeant Curtis Garth and his crew didn't stay to see much of it. The war had already moved on north toward the Belgian border and east toward the Siegfried Line. The Rhino tanks were still rolling their welded tusks, now standard issue, on dozens of vehicles across multiple divisions. For Garth, the battlefield had become a paradox. He had built something crude, ugly, and improvised, yet it was now saving lives in places he'd never see. He sat beside his Sherman on a misty morning near Amiens, checking the weld seams for the 100th time. Evans came over with 2 tin mugs of coffee. "You checking that beast again?" Garth nodded. "If it holds the boys behind us live. If it fails, they don't." "Seems worth checking." Evans smiled. "You ever gonna realize you built the most famous tank in Europe?" Garth chuckled. "It's not famous. It's just useful." Around them, the war's machinery rumbled endlessly. Convoys, fuel trucks, engineers laying bridges across rivers. The great machine of Allied momentum was alive now, unstoppable. But even amidst the noise, there was a strange quiet in Garth's mind. For the first time, he was thinking beyond war. He remembered the shop back home, the smell of grease and oak floors, the hum of the welding torch, the laughter of his younger brother before he'd shipped out. Evans interrupted the thought. "You know what I miss most?" "What noise?" Evans said. "The right kind. Radios, factory floors, engines that aren't trying to kill you." Garth laughed softly. "You might get your wish. They'll need builders after this. A lot of them." Evans raised an eyebrow. "You think you'll go back to it?" "Yeah," Garth said. "But maybe I'll weld something that doesn't have to move through hell to be useful." The conversation was cut short by a jeep screeching to a halt nearby. Captain Daniels stepped out, waving a sheet of paper. "Orders, boys. The brass wants us on the front by morning." "Bastogne. They're saying the Germans are regrouping." Evans groaned. "And here I was thinking the war was over." Daniels shook his head. "Not yet. But we're close. Closer than we've ever been." He turned to Garth. "Command wants you at HQ before we move. Some correspondents asking to see the man who welded the Rhinos." Garth frowned. "A reporter?" "Yeah," Daniels said, grinning. "Guess they finally figured out wars aren't just won by shooting." Later that day, Garth stood awkwardly in front of a field desk where a young war correspondent sat with a typewriter. Her name was Helen Marks, one of the few female journalists attached to the front. "So you're Sergeant Garth," she said, adjusting her hat. "The man who taught tanks to chew through France." Garth scratched the back of his neck. "Ma'am, I didn't teach him anything. Just gave him sharper teeth." Helen smiled. "You know the Germans have a word for this kind of improvisation. Kampfgenie. Battle genius." He laughed. "Don't know about genius. I just got tired of losing men to bushes." She leaned forward, curiosity bright in her eyes. "What made you think of it?" He hesitated. "We were stuck. Couldn't go forward. Couldn't dig in. And I kept thinking, we've got all this scrap lying around. Armor plates, steel beams, broken obstacles. Seemed stupid not to use it. So I welded it to the front of the tank. Figured if the land's the problem, change the land." Helen typed as he spoke. "Change the land," she repeated. "That's a good line." Garth shrugged. "It's not poetry. It's welding." She smiled faintly. "Sometimes it's the same thing." By the time the interview ended, the sun was setting over the fields. The glow turned the Rhino tusks a deep orange, as if still red-hot from the torch that had forged them. Helen lowered her camera after snapping a photo. You know, Sergeant, back home they'll turn you into a story. Maybe a movie. Garth laughed, shaking his head. If they do, make sure they spell Evans's name right. Evans, she asked. My driver, he said. Couldn't have built it without him holding the torch steady. She smiled. I'll make sure to include that. As she walked away, Garth called after her. And don't make it sound like it was easy. She turned back, grinning. The good stories never are. That night, Garth sat beside the tank helmet off the sky filled with distant artillery flashes. He thought of Normandy, of mud sweat and fear, of sparks leaping from the welder's arc, of the sound of metal giving way to an idea. Evans climbed out of the turret and sat beside him. You know what's funny, Sarge? What's that? All this noise, all this fire, all this death. And it all turned because one guy decided to fix something. Garth smiled. Yeah. Guess war's just a lot of problems waiting for someone stupid enough to solve them. Evans laughed. Then here's to being stupid. Garth raised his canteen. I'll drink to that. Weeks later, the Rhino tanks crossed the border into Belgium, still pushing, still braking. But in every welded plate, every spark of steel, there remained the memory of a man who'd refused to wait for orders, who'd chosen to build when others were breaking. And somewhere in the noise of the war, beneath the roar of engines and the echo of artillery, there was still the quiet hiss of a torch. A single spark that had changed everything.